Please welcome Peter. He's very tired, so give him a bit of a
my question, I hate to ask an awkward one first, but it's about Stefan Molyneux.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Who? I completely share your frustration. I know the thing we always talk about when reaching out to people trying to teach them our ways is about talking on their terms. And so the thing I saw in that debate was, although I was completely on your side, do you feel at what point you can't talk on their terms anymore? Because I know he was butchering everything he was saying.
He's a different animal. When I approach people that are obviously in disagreement, I try, as I think you all should know, and hopefully try your best to as well, to relate to them as much as possible. So if you really look at that conversation at the beginning, I'm trying my best to actually agree, which I did in loose general ways, to try and create common ground, and then you approach subjects piece by piece. But if you talk to someone that's there just to argue, someone that's there just for the sake of a little combat, intellectual combat, which I realized very early, and then as far as that interview is concerned, or debate as I loosely call it, because I don't debate. I don't know if people figured that out. I will talk and relate, but debate is a whole different animal. Debate has a very specific historical context. You debate in order to win in public perception. That's not really a high integrity type of arguing, high integrity communication system. It doesn't meet point to point. Usually it divides and subdivides, it gets confusing, you throw people off. And he's very good at that, so I'll give him that credit for being a douchebag. So that's just not me. So I guess when you run into people that are argumentative, that are literally there to combat just for the sake of combating, you have to learn when to stop. Learn when to not engage because you know you're not going to get through to them. And I probably should have just closed that conversation about the 30-minute mark, because if you look at my face throughout the rest of it, it's just me holding myself back from saying something that is particularly insulting that I probably have already said here. So
I have a follow-up question to that,
sure,
which is, we look at Stefan Molyneux, we look at Alex Jones, another name to meet each other. These are people that are obviously building up huge audiences online, which is alternative media. It all gets bundled into one term. I'm just curious to know if you had any ideas of sort of, I don't want to use the word battle, but in the long run, as the system collapses, you know, people always go to the people with the answers.
Sure.
But there's a lot of answers, so we're going to have to face these people and their communities again. So I don't know if you thought about that.
I wouldn't think about the facing of them. I mean, I think the data exists beyond them. You know what I mean? If you want to argue anarcho-capitalism, or if you want to argue, well, I don't know what the hell Jones represents anymore, but
Paleo-conservative.
Yeah, I just say right-wing extremism. If you want to, you just realize that the data exists on its own, and the principles and theories that these people write about, and I think about it that way. I try not to deal with the personalities if I can help it. Clearly, if you want to engage conversation, which I'm trying to be as open as possible to, I'm more prone to talk to people that disagree than those that agree. If you look at my track record, I'm just a masochist like that. But I do it from the standpoint of really trying to get beyond the identity stuff and the self-preservation and everything that goes along with it, which again goes down to that relatability. So, you know, if anyone wants to engage anyone else in opposing ideology, if you want to call it that, just try to see common ground and look at it from the standpoint of data and not their whims, not their personality, I should say, because that really gets in the way. I've used that example before. When you hear someone speak, it's like reading a book. You try to avoid the nuances of what their body gesture, their emotional relationship to what they're saying. Just look at it. Because if you look at political stuff, it's all persuasion by emotional appeal. And that's, if you look and read, say, a political debate on paper, and then you compared how that felt when you watch them, you get a very different response. So aesthetics and being an actor, and like Molyneux is brilliant with that, because he really could easily be a lawyer or a politician very successfully. So, and Jones is just an emotional appeal guy. He just gets really loud, just big and huge, and that's what he does. I mean, that's how he creates that air of authority and accuracy, is he's literally just beating you over the head with it. So, back to my point, the first televised debate in American history was John F. Kennedy versus Richard Nixon. People heard it on the radio and they thought that Nixon won. But Nixon looked terrible on screen. So when people saw the visual debate, everyone turned turn to, say, Kennedy won. So it goes to show the persuasion. Yeah. Anybody else have anything to say about that?
Actually, yeah, I can add a few points.
He used to be an actor, right?
Actually, Molyneux used to be an actor. Do people know that? Yes, he did. He was an actor. And it's not surprising, because then he was also a salesman, as am I. As are we all. This particular brand of apology for capital and empire, known as Austrian economics, has had we've had a few skirmishes. Molyneux's the loudest and baldest. I'm talking about his style. Graham Wright wrote a couple of articles along with me that failed after he just couldn't get me to admit to him that the definition of money as a means of exchange and that sort, which presumably means you could never invest it. And then Victor Pross, of course, is the most recent example with our lovely Matt Berkowitz in Vancouver, who also, if you look at how he behaves online, is also a belligerent arsehole as well. He will preach freedom and non-violence and then insult everybody on Facebook. Is there an irony there? I hope so. So there are a few planks to these arguments that they have, which we are going to respond. I'm at least going to respond to in print because they keep coming up, which can be belittled and got rid of quite easily through facts and research, which is something that they don't like. But other than that, it's just going to be ready for the type of argument they do, which is debate always. It's what's the other word for it? Some kind of
conflict.
Yeah, it's a P word, not political. What's it called when they deliberately undermine each other's arguments in a trickery kind of way? I've forgotten. Polemic. It's polemical.
Right.
It's all polemic, really.
Right.
It's tricking you into being wrong, or making you feel like you're being wrong. As those three have pointed out.
Yeah, I'd just like to take a different point on that as well. Not going the total douchebag route, because obviously that's how you react to it on emotional. My research shows and points. We had this talk about the other night about this exact subject, and you have to remember that a lot of people are psychologically damaged in society as well. Yeah, you know, people who are like schizophrenic, they're Asperger's or whatever, but they still function in society and they can still be very convincing and seen to a lot of people as intelligent. Yeah. They can be sociopathic, they can be psychopathic, you know, and I take a view that these people are just not quite right in the head, you know, in the way that a lot of people can think about things and logically rationalise them out. Also, then there's huge things with ego in the way, and for these people, somebody like Molyneux, he will never admit that online or in front of other people, you know. It would be a complete, he's got so much invested in his own business, in his followers and all the rest of it, you know. I mean, you could really call them, it is kind of a cult, yeah. So you have to remember that as well, that these people might not be quite, you know, not quite sort of normal and rational, purely from a psychological problem.
But I think narcissists, that's an important one.
Yeah, well, these are all psychological conditions, and we all suffer from them. Everybody in this room, and if you're not admitting it, you're a liar, because I know. I all know. But you know, we all have problems from time to time, but sometimes they're exaggerated in people like this, you know. And this environment that we live in is the perfect environment for people to flourish like that, especially your sociopaths and your psychopaths. Hence, the way the world is run at the moment, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'll add one more thing with respect to, since you brought up self-preservation. People won't back down because they've invested so much, and that's very much a financial relationship that we have. It's people, just like a corporation that the last thing they want is some new invention to come along and completely destroy what they've created, which is why you have the slow molasses process of change when it comes to industry in the broad view, which is why, for example, you don't have large-scale renewable energy everywhere, which has been around for a long, long time. And people have known better for a long, long time, but the large-scale energy infrastructures to invest in hydrocarbons to make that kind of leap as dramatic and dire as it's needed. So that comes with a psychological cost. So if you run a podcast and you're entirely dependent on donations, or if you're someone like Alex Jones who has to sell all of this stuff, he's never going to turn back around and say that he was wrong about the New World Order. Even though I happen to know people that are close to him that have admitted to me, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will, that he basically doesn't believe any of it. He does it because he's so invested in it and he can't back down. What if he did? His whole little market, it's not even little anymore, his whole massive subculture of fear-mongering and people that spend an enormous amount of attention towards him and his industry would feel cheated. They would feel so. In other words, change isn't supported in the system on both the psychological level and on an establishment level, which I think is a really good point. If you had a society that wasn't predicated on supporting yourself through money, creating an image, doing everything that we all do, or having an establishment, people would be so much more vulnerable to change, admitting when they're wrong, you know? So I think it feeds into the system. And in my Germany lecture, I actually put together a quantifiable formula for efficiency based on symbolic logic, which starts the beginning of an algorithm that can be put into practice. And I've had programmers all across email me about wanting to help with this, which is fantastic, because this is another great project. So I guess my point is, transition is an educational issue. But what education means is not just reading a book. It means creating systems. It means showing people what we can actually do in the most communicatively appropriate way we can, with obviously not spending a couple $1 billion on building a test city, which is not going to happen for a very, 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 very long time, if ever. Frankly, I think the real transition will happen because of ephemeralization, because of the fact that we can constantly do more with less. Some country, maybe a South American country, is going to get really tired of the West and the North being so brutal with their hegemonic behavior. And wait, I can see you about to interrupt me.
Yeah, because it would be the East, not the West.
And they are going to have the technological capacity at that point, because of the rapid advancement, how efficient material use is. They're going to close themselves off. And they're going to say, we're not going to deal with your globalization anymore. We're not going to deal with your labor exploitation anymore. And they're going to set a standard. They're going to set a precedent, I should say.
How is that relevant to people in the rest of the world?
They're going to see them do it. And then they're like, whoa, see that country over there that's completely sustainable, that's off the grid, that's not even attached to globalization anymore? See that country over there that is doing all these things with a 2-hour-a-week work schedule? I think that's the kind of model our society should have, and that's how it catches forward.
That's not relevant to people's day-to-day lives. I can understand. I understand.
Well, then how about you go home and figure it out, because this is the best I can offer you right now. I've laid out a train of thought here that I think is very applicable, and I think can actually work to show the world what's possible. And it's never going to stop with any of these ideas. All of us have ideas of such.
Point B is a clear focus to have, though.
The clear focus is to show people what can be done.
An objective.
Yeah, the objective is to show how this model works and how to build it and how to set it in motion in the best way we can without actually doing it with billions and billions of dollars, which we don't have.
I don't know exactly what it is. How can you do that?
Well, I know. I think it's been explained readily. It's been readily apparent how this model works. If you haven't looked into it enough, then I suggest that's an error on your end.
I don't know.
Yes.
Sounds awfully vague to me.
Okay, well, watch my lecture in Germany.
You can give me a list of definite...
Does anyone in this room have a completely ambiguous understanding of what we've been talking about for the past 5 years, to the extent that you're just absolutely confused?
Does anyone have a list of specific objectives and goals that they can give the person who's confused?
By objectives and goals, do you mean like we want a billion people to have seen a film?
Targets, goals, you know, just stuff that...
By 2015 we're off money? I mean, is that what you're... Thing is, it's not actually very specific to say specific goals. That's the trick.
You take this information on board and then you go out in the real world and you be the change in the world. You talk about this to people. I talk about this to people every day at work, all the time, you know? And you spread these ideas out and you can see the changes going on around the world. You can see the demonstrations, you can see, you know, I've demoed a lot, you know, fairly middle-aged guy now, but at the first time in ever I've seen people demonstrating with the, you know, asking for the abolition of money, you know, and everybody is really starting to understand the system. Look, you can't wake up in the morning and want to be a doctor, right? Although you might want to be. You have to go and study and take time and learn about it, yeah? It's a developmental process, yeah? And the more you learn about this, the better you are at talking about it, the better you are at communicating the ideas. Then you might want to go into working in alternative energy or some kind of healthcare program. This information gives you the ideas to branch out into other areas of your life where you see where the problems are as well. And that's what I mean by emergence, and that's what I mean by transition. This affects, I mean, surely everybody in this room is a different person from when they were 5 years ago with the information they've had. Is that a fair comment?
Yep.
Thank you.
Let's move on. We have to move on, Daniel.
And it wasn't meant as personal with Dana in that sense.
You haven't answered my question, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's an unanswerable question.
We answered your question about 4 times. You just don't accept the answer.
There are no unanswered questions.
Moving on. Hi, my name's Aidan. Just one of the one of the pictures I'm hearing emerging from the different answers is like a network. We've got connection to children, we've got connection with people who aren't using polemics to divide, we've got connection to groups who are at the coalface, who are setting up their own communities. You know, they've got different missions, but they're part of the same process. Now, obviously there are a lot of passionate people out there at the moment, a lot of them aren't part of Zeitgeist, there are different organisations.
What's the question?
Yeah, the question is, when these groups can work together, under sort of a principle of unity, the idea that they should work together, would you endorse a principle of unity, encouraging Zeitgeisters to say, if you can work together with other groups, do? And if so, what advice might you give to someone who wants to do that?
Well, I think all of our Z-Days have had third-party representation. You guys have had a number of different organizations.
It was only third party last year.
And I know the main event in Toronto is going to have a number of other third parties as well. That's already been kind of talked about. So anyone that's in line with basic sustainability on some tier, they don't necessarily have to see exactly the view that we do. And who knows, maybe this will transition. The end goals continue to move the more you think about what sustainability means. You know what I mean? So it's not as easy as to say, oh, let's get rid of money and put it in the system. It goes beyond that. It's a developmental process of what it means to be sustainable both culturally and environmentally. And that is not going to stop. That's going to keep transitioning and keep morphing as far as our awareness. So people plant seeds all the time with stuff like that. We are completely open to that. There's no one that's ever said. Now, there's a big difference between, say, people that go out and start big farming projects. If someone says, oh, I'm in the Zeitgeist Movement and I have this huge farm project, and that doesn't mean that the Zeitgeist Movement does farm projects. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Zeitgeist Movement, holistically as an umbrella organization, is about any form of sustainability that's moving towards this new economy. That's our thesis, it's our mission statement. But underneath the surface of that, people can do whatever they like in the regards to sustainability. That's an all-encompassing type of awareness. So yeah, we don't put down anybody for attempting to help in any possible way. Hi.
What's your view on socialism and the way people brand the movement as socialist?
Okay.
What do you think is the best way to counter that common problem?
You just identify it and make them realize that the distinction is moot, is what I would say. Socialism is defined as most, because you can get a lot of definitions, but in the most average context, socialism is defined as the means of production owned by anything but private organizations. That's basically it. It just means that's all the definition is. And it is community. Just like in truth, everything is community because there's no such thing as property. So they can call this socialism if they want, but it doesn't do anything. It's just wasting air to call it socialism because it's radically different than every other kind of central planning or every other kind of institution that's exists historically, which is why I would never use that term because the historical stigma is so dramatic and links to central planning and all those other factors. Plus, as I'll point this out, one more thing is means of production has become equally as antiquated. It's a culture lag.
But these people don't know that. Yeah, they get the idea in their head. It's social.
Then there's no easy answers. You can't just in one sentence dismiss people that bring these things up, which is why I brought up these numerous issues. Like people say, well, the means of production. Who owns the means of production? You say it's well. First of all, what do you mean by means of production? In the new world, the labor power is being replaced by machines. It's happening right now. That means capital goods is becoming labor power. Simultaneously, capital goods are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, which means they're becoming consumer goods, like 3D printing. You know, in theory, when you go to your home computer and you print a piece of paper from your printer, you are engaging in a mini means of production. You are in control of that print process. That means you are in control of this very small means of production. The lines are blurring dramatically from the scales, the economies of scale we had, both in Soviet communism and that we have now in the free market with these massive industrial processes. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which makes things on demand. So in other words, it becomes convoluted. So the very notion of socialism by historical defense is convoluted and culture lagged compared to where we are today.
Yeah.
So, but was there anything else you wanted to ask? I'm sorry, I thought I interrupted you.
No, that's it.
So
What a nice short question.
Yeah. So it's moot to me. I mean that in the sense that, is this socialism? You say, what does that mean? Let's say it is. What does that mean?
I was going to say socialism leads to capitalism, and then these people have black and white pictures in there,
Yeah.
people queuing for loaves of bread.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. It's a bias that's been conjured up.
I would say come at it maybe from a semantic angle and ask what socialism, when and where.
Right.
And also get them to define their terms before they do that. And soon you'll see the rabbits in the headlights and the conversation's over. Well, this is the point, because socialism is not a physically referented word, it's a higher order abstraction that you cannot possibly communicate on someone with. Do you mean the socialism that apparently was taking place in Russia in 1919? Or do you mean the socialism in Cuba? Or do you mean what type of socialism, when, where, who was in charge, what day, what date? And they go, oh shit! And you're like, it's just a word you've got in your head, I'm sorry. It's just an abstract word, and you hear Fresco talk about this a lot, about communication and semantics. We have a huge problem with language, it's very out of date, and socialism is one of the victims of that particular practice. I would strongly recommend everybody read a book called The Tyranny of Words. It's very important to understand that the language you're using is very out of date and a very useful method by which to communicate if you understand it better.
Or that quickly, then I'm going to ask for a question from this side because they haven't had anything yet. Actually, if you mentioned The Tyranny of Words, the amusing thing is that that's a book from the 1920s and it now gets printed on demand as you order it, which is sort of a bit of a good example of what we're talking about, doesn't it? Question from Rhoda, please.
I was wondering if you could give a layman's version of a response to the economic calculation problem, because I didn't really understand.
Yeah, sure. The economic calculation problem is a market problem. I say that explicitly. It only pertains to a trade economy. At least that's my interpretation of it. If you want to get rid of the mechanism of price, which is what the economic calculation problem states is the ultimate mediator of decisions, price can take subjective human whims and convert them into objective numerical values, that is price. So all of us, heterogeneous goods can be compared very easily. So this microphone can find value with this bottle of water because we can put an arbitrary, subjective, utilitarian value on what we think these things mean, with a little hint of technical value. There's a little bit of labor, energy, and price. There's a little bit of scarcity in price, but all of that is extremely obscure because it's not actually going back to any root relationship that pertains to the materials used or the mechanisms used. It's only determined by the competitive thing of the market that keeps spiraling around, which produces these values. So I hope that makes sense. Now you mentioned layman's terms. But really, and I said this in my lecture, if you want to get rid of this problem, as they say, which means determining value, you just get rid of exchange explicitly. And you create a mechanism, which we can do now through technology, where the individual can directly relate to the means of production. So to reduce this down, I use the example of a printer. Imagine in some towns they have 3D printing offices where you can send a 3D printing design, and you send it there and they print it for you. Of course you pay for it now, but you're basically in control of this mini factory system in these 3D printing processes. Imagine if the world was organized with large-scale, extremely well-crafted 3D, not 3D printing, but manufacturing facilities that did the same thing as your home printer. You did it on demand. So you sat at home, you engaged the process. Again, the layman's term thing is hard to do. I'm doing my best because I did the whole lecture on this in Germany. That was the whole point of this. Is you can create a means to engage directly, participatorily, run through algorithmic filters that make sure that you have the highest sustainability of the materials you're using, coupled with the ability of everyone else to engage and contribute to your design through this process, which is brilliant. It's really the sharing of the group mind. And this thing will evolve into a catalog of goods, which people input into this system, which are available to everyone as well. To print ideally on demand, I think the highest state of the future are these highly advanced industrial systems that can basically create the vast majority of goods on demand without the need for specialized structures that we have today driven by corporations that only do certain things. So you put as many good productions as you can in one center, which we can do. Again, feminalization applies to this as well. You just have to be more strategic in how you design things and the materials that you use. So the economic calculation problem has actually been debunked numerous times by socialists a long time ago. They were using standardized computer algorithmic thought to think about how to put units, quantifiable units. For example, scarcity. People talk about scarcity in the market economy. No one really knows the state of scarcity because of secrets. No one really knows how many diamonds there are. Obviously, no one knows how much oil there is because the debate has been raging forever. And everyone keeps lying. Everyone keeps getting caught lying. Now they do these projections that are completely made up. You know, most of the analysis you see about this new resurgence of hydrocarbon energy. These are projections made with numbers that they don't even have. They're just taking tiny little trends and throwing them way out in the future. And that's how they've been doing this for years, which is why you can't really believe any of it. So you can't say that the market actually accounts for scarcity in price because no one even knows. You can't, it's not quantifiable. If it was, you can go to a database right now and see every single resource and what we know about every single resource. They might have that in the internal secret workings of De Beers diamonds, but then again, they're in competition with other diamond producers, and they're not going to release what they have. So that's in order to do it in the future, in other words, you have to have absolute allocation, absolute awareness of all the resources definitively. So you have to share all the information, and then you create algorithms that denote scarcity of certain goods. Let me state this very simply, and see if I can do it without a visual accompaniment. Every single material has a set of conducive propensities. So copper is good for conducting electricity, right? And there are numerous other metals that are good for that too, but with different degrees of efficiency. So right there you have a measure. If you want to delegate a certain metal to conduct electricity, you set up a grid and you look at all the major metals that do so very well. You rate their efficiency, which is very objectively quantifiable based on the gauge and all the things that go along with it. And then you compare the efficiency to the amount of scarcity. And boom, you have a direct numerical correlation. And with that process, in calculation done rapidly by a computer, you can decide at any given point, based on comparing the efficiency of any given thing, any given metal, based on how much scarcity is available of each, which means you prioritize based on the most you have. You come up with, boom, that one metal that is most optimized and most sustainable for that given point in time. That is true economic calculation of material. So, I'll leave it at that. And you can watch the rest of the lecture for more on that stuff. Yes. Simone?
Was that the layman's version?
I was going to add 2 points. There is actually a really good essay online, I forget, Neil Kernan shared it a while ago, which explains how price isn't a rational measure either, because those prices themselves are subject to the very market they claim to rule. Just think about that for one moment. The fact that the idea that price should be rational isn't. Exactly, absolutely. Not just that, you could have a $15,000 handbag, all this kind of stuff. And also, and the second point is, it doesn't alleviate scarcity whatsoever at all. In the following example, which you actually mentioned on the radio years ago, some idiot, economist, wrote in and said, money operates very well to stop scarcity because if we ran out of all of the oil, of course, oil gets more and more expensive until we just had one barrel that was $1 trillion, so we'll never run out of oil. Do I need to explain the idiocy of this? So actually, there is no, those 3 points, generally, absolute operant efficiency, price is a non-rational force. In fact, as informed by the market, they get it the wrong way around, as usual. They like to do that. And then the third one is it doesn't at all stop scarcity, other than it stops you to be able to purchase it, which sounds like coercion to me from a non-coercive bunch of Austrians. It seems quite ironic.
I add one more thing. Price not only doesn't stop scarcity in that way, it perpetuates it. Yeah. The market system wants scarcity. It needs to preserve it. The last thing the market wants is high levels of efficiency and abundance and things that don't require constant servicing. Imagine for a moment if someone right now produced a solar array based on the technology we have today with 80% conversion efficiency as opposed to the 18% that we can barely get right now in the consumer markets. And they put these things out through printing mechanisms where a person simply acquired a 3D printer that could print these sheets, right? They put it in their homes. Very simple layers. It's very easy technology these days. And they were able to basically, with one purchase of a printing system, have all of their power driven in their home for the next 100 years without any servicing whatsoever. Maybe a little maintenance on that printer every now and again. And you did this over the course of 5 years, and let's use the United States as an example, where there's about 150 million households. And you were able to provide this equipment to every single one of these households within 5 years. That would be a catastrophe for the entire utility and energy industry. Now that would be beautifully efficient, wouldn't it? Amazingly efficient. Everyone would be off the grid, they'd be completely reliant on the sun. There's a ubiquitous source of energy that really powers pretty much everything on the planet. But no, that would be a disaster for the market. So the price is the worst because it preserves scarcity. It doesn't even come close to wanting abundance. It hates that. Okay.
I'm like, this is a stupid question.
There's no stupid question. There are no stupid questions, only stupid people. Stupid
we were talking about price, and I've seen or had read that way early on in capitalism there was this idea that the guiding hand of the market was just going to be this invisible, odd thing that guided things. And we can see that that's how planet Earth is currently run. That people try and make a profit, and as a result, all of these things happen. Banks happen, people buy houses, things get built, boats get built, people go to the moon. So in a post-capitalist world where there is no longer any money, and I see the designs of Jacques Fresco, and they seem so industrial and so large and so grand in scale, and everything is planetary. What is the guiding hand? Who is in the driving seat of what gets constructed, what doesn't, and how does that actually work?
The public, and that's, again, that goes back to, well, I'll say this actually, the public is a misnomer, I should say, it's a misnomer, is the right word. It's actually the sustainability rules that are inherent in the laws of nature. With us, in a participatory economic process that can have a filter that recognizes this. Now, if you're not familiar with any of this, I apologize in advance. But this is exactly what I talked about in Germany, and I suggest you punch up when it's posted, economic calculation and natural law resource-based economy. You can create an interface where everyone can contribute to industry, and they can share ideas, put through this filter, this, I hate to use the word artificial intelligence because that's just a strange stigma, but just an algorithmic evaluation to make sure, as I mentioned in this example over here, that we are calculating the right properties, using the right materials for the right circumstances. All the 92 common elements of Earth that you see in the periodic table, these are patterns more than they are anything else. They work with other elements to create certain sequences, and all of this can be understood. You can program this stuff, even though it's a little bit advanced at this time. Within this mechanism, you can create an industrial system that is completely in tune with all the basic laws of nature. And then, once you have that basic understanding, once that commitment is there, once this programming is in place, everyone can work to engage it. And they can work to contribute to everything that's done in society, literally everything, from the creation of this type of technology, of a microphone, to where roads go, to the logic that, and it's not just subjective in the sense of democracy where you're just like a voting system, I can't reiterate that enough. It's actually a process of calculation, using the human mind, using the shared awareness that we have, because everyone knows different things, in concert with an arrangement and filter that can make sure that we're on the right path to sustainability. I hope that that's fairly easy to understand.
It makes sense. I guess I'd be really interested to see then a demo. I'm not saying this is...
Yes, that's exactly, a demo is exactly what I've been trying to get programmed.
Because as an art project, that sounds super interesting. People could really engage with something, okay, I stand in front of this system, and out comes this post-capitalist industrial system. Can we create that? Can we show that to people? What would it look like? I think that would be really
Actually, it's been done in reality. It's called Project Cybersyn. If you, it was Chile, I believe, yeah.
It's an English dude,
an English guy who basically developed exactly the system that Peter's describing.
Oh, exactly.
Close, and it worked very well. But it was shut down by the military junta, I believe, who came after the president was assassinated. So.
Jim, there was actually an example in abstraction again, because I think we all tend to think in very large boxes. So like, we're in this system, we need to get into that. So how do we move into that system without realizing it is obviously the slow kind of thing? One small example, which I admit against interest, being a person who sells chemistry journals. A boy recently read, you know what open access is? Open access is free end user availability to peer-reviewed journal materials that have been paid for by the state, usually. This boy reads a load of material on design, basically to do with diabetic testing, and then designs an open source thing from free information that, is it regulates blood sugar? I can't remember what it was, but it was groundbreaking, and he is a boy. Right. So these are tiny examples of where what would happen if you had actual availability of relevant information that has normally been sold because they have to sell, because they have to feed their kids, like I do. if you watch it once and see who would do this, well, some kid is the answer. Some kid would do it. And they always do, don't they? There was that kid recently who annoyingly worked out how to clean all the oceans in 5 years. Fuck, don't know that place, do they? This stuff happens already against interest, against the market model, without the profitability motive. Already, imagine for 10 seconds. That was my dramatic moment.
Again, this is another thing. You're obviously talking about moving into a new type of economic system and how that would happen, right? Well, we were talking about this last night, and you know what's happening in the Philippines recently, yeah, for example, yeah, and it's often the case when you see these huge disasters, right? I mean, you've seen the pictures of the Philippines, right? It's gone. You know, everything is gone, right? It's wood and bit, you know. Now they've got to rebuild it all again, right? Now, when they're rescuing the people, up to now, they're not kind of pulling them out or putting them on stretchers or giving them. They're not asking for their cards to punch in their PIN number, you know, for the cost of this aid and all the rest of it. Yeah, we've got all this. Everything's in place to shift over to this system. You know, I work in construction. You know, and you know, people like mine go on about cooperatives. Well, look, the construction has to happen cooperatively. You can't run a hospital with non-cooperation of the staff and everything. We do all work together all the time, but external to the business I work in is the pressure of the monetary system. You know, most people I work with enjoy actually doing what they do. You know, I certainly, you know, when I was a sparky electrician when I was younger, and you know, I do different stuff now. If I went to work for an elderly person who couldn't really afford, I'd charge them less, you know, and if I lived in a different system, I'd do it for nothing, you know? Why wouldn't you? Everybody's better off. You know, we feel good about helping people in the Philippines, yeah? We want to help them. The military's there. The military's there doing what it should be doing, not dropping fucking bombs on them. The helicopters are piling in and they're giving food and aid, and that's what we can do. We can do all this shit, you know? We can do it. It's just a cultural value shift. It's all in our fucking heads.
And the invisible hand is invisible because it was never there.
There's a non-invisible hand over there.
There's a non-invisible one.
Please.
Just following on from your point about sort of charity aid that's going to the Philippines, can you ever imagine using that and becoming a non-profit organisation, getting donations in, you know, to actually help bring, you know, get projects to you know, into fruition a lot quicker? Or, you know, are you trying to avoid that because half the group's going to go, well, he can't use money to get out of money and all this sort of stuff?
Well, the movement itself, as the umbrella organization it is, doesn't do anything like that. That doesn't mean there aren't sub-organizations within the movement. So, for example, in Los Angeles, where I'm from, we've started a non-profit, which is in its process of going forward. It's not under the Zeitgeist Movement title. I think it's called something like the Zeitgeist Foundation, something like that. So we're working towards this for other either localized projects that we're doing, or maybe even larger scale global projects, so we can do that. The Global Redesign Institute isn't necessarily the Zeitgeist Movement. It's hard for me to make this distinction, but I do, because I don't want anyone to feel that the movement is inclusive or exclusive. It's anything that anyone wants to do that is within the context of sustainability with the general goal of trying to see a new social system in place. So you won't see on the Zeitgeist Movement website a donation button, but you might see a sub-project emerge through a Kickstarter in the future for an actual, real, tangible, public project. So there is a dividing line there. The movement was started without the interest in exploiting people for money. And I didn't use that word exploitation very, very literally, because if you just put up a donation button, everyone's so full of hope on this issue, they're just throwing money at stuff. And it also reduces people's personal responsibility. If you throw money at something, what's that old Living Color song? I've sent my money to Live Aid, now go away. It's a way to just dismiss your, because everyone needs to get involved mentally in this type of stuff. If you want to have a real society where people are actually engaging, and I don't want to use this word democratic, but in the sense of the loose democracy and representative democracy, which is the fraud that it is across the world today, which is just a cloak for more power elitism, what a representative democracy is. But actual engagement and sharing information, actually working together and arriving at solutions with the community interest, they're going to start thinking that way. They're going to start putting themselves in that kind of position. So it works on multiple levels. But yes, to answer your question, we are doing that for larger projects, especially probably Global Redesign Institute at times.
Do you think, though, that if you did include the fact that it sort of branched from the Zeitgeist movement, that more people not in the movement might think, oh, they're actually doing something?
Yes, absolutely. No, I believe me. We've gotten this criticism for years. What are you guys doing? You're just sharing information. Well, they put that down as though it's some small thing. But these projects, the three that I mentioned in passing, I loosely touched upon Miles Dyer's project as well, because I think it works in the same concept. And there's many other people that have projects too that all fall under the same umbrella of trying to really re-engineer the various facets of society to be the most sustainable, both environmentally and culturally, and that opens the floodgates for lots of ideas.
It's a bit like, you have to have a brand awareness in a sense.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, again, some people are terrified of this extreme view, and they are all about sustainability, but they don't quite go the full length. And rather than omit them from the equation, let's just say, okay, well, here's your path. If you're into open source ecology, if you're into lots of other ideas, into earth shifts, if you're into all sorts of sustainable lo-fi, called lo-fi sustainability, where you're not really applying high-end engineering yet, meaning high-energy stuff that can really produce abundance, that can really create long-lasting system change, that's great. And hopefully those people that are involved in those sustainability projects, and I'm not trying to be condescending, but I'm hoping that they will see the point of the larger transition, not just to hide away in communities, which tends to be, that's one of the things that's happened throughout the beginning of the movement, is people trying to get away from it. Like, okay, Zeitgeist, we're going to go live in a small little vertical farm city out in the middle of Wyoming, and then we'll be done. And that doesn't help anything. Being off the grid and detaching yourself is great for a symbolic gesture, but it's not going to change the world. So,
I've just got a few statements and questions, okay? I think our biggest priority is waking enough people up.
Yeah.
Is that what you see here? So I see other people like Alex Jones, David Icke, they're reaching millions of people per week, and I just think we need to communicate better to their audiences. And I see they've done a lot of action to wake a lot of people up, and I think this little ego battle of like, oh, he's a propagandist and like us, and I think we need to work together better. And I was really saddened by your interview with him, and not
Alex Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it was anyone's fault. I'm just saying that concerns weren't shared. Like maybe he's a bit less intelligent than you. I don't know, but so we could have heard his concerns.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but some people are completely diametrically opposed to everything that we're saying. If there's anyone out there in the public sphere that's voiced his absolute opposition, it would be Alex Jones. So I don't know how we'd find common ground.
Yeah. But what about if we just heard their concerns? Because I bet we can't share so many concerns with them that we can work.
He's voiced his concerns numerous times about how it's a giant supercomputer programmed by J.P. Morgan.
There's some stuff about Satan in there as well.
Yeah, Satan.
But I mean concerns about our shared concerns, like our shared concerns that the money system set up for the elites. Like they've exposed so much. Like we are change as well.
Sure.
But
they don't touch the market system.
I know, but we're waking people up. That's our biggest priority.
We'll move on to David Icke. David Icke just started a channel. Now, I disagree with David Icke in many ways, but I also think he's a really nice guy and a very well-meaning guy. And he has a new TV channel, and I'm going to do an interview with somebody else affiliated. They came to the media festival. They were there. They were represented. The TV channel was. And, he's all about, he's moved away from a lot of the kind of strange views to a certain extent publicly that he's put forward that's sort of, debased him a bit in public conception. And he's gone into giving access to a lot of people now with this new TV channel. So if he wants to support the movement, we're certainly not going to withdraw from any support.
Do you think you or someone else from the movement would go back on Alex Jones InfoWars and maybe...
If he invited me back and did what I asked him to do, which was to apologize for calling me a New World Order Illuminati Satanist, then maybe.
He's got a big ego, he won't do that. Why don't we just share our conversations?
But all he's going to do is bring me... I don't want to get into that conversation. Okay. He's just going to bring it on as a spectacle. It's a spectre.
All I'm saying is that we're then reaching millions, and I think we have our shared concerns are bigger than any of our differences.
Listen, a lot of media organisations reach millions. By the way, we reach more people. I can see the statistics on the back end. We reach more people than you probably think. It's not quite millions a week. I also think that's an overstatement of Jones or of David Icke, who, by the way, hasn't backed away from some of his crazy things. He does think the moon is hollow. Yeah, that's true. And then it rings like a bell. Whatever.
There are people that are starting to speak up now that are really in the public eye, like Russell Brand.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And he's been on.
Yes. And by the way, do you think that would have happened 5 years ago? Do I have to make this point every time I meet people who are disillusioned with the fact that an entrenched system takes a long time to change and you thought it was all going to happen so easily?
Got to plant seeds.
Yeah. Huge thing, Russell Brand, absolutely. By the way, we reached out to him before he did all that stuff with the new
Yeah, I wanted to.
And by the way, he invited me on his TV show about a year ago called Brand X, but I couldn't do it due to schedule problems, and his show was canceled before the second season. So if that doesn't give you a clue to the very high possibility that he's extremely familiar with the movement does.
Oh, yeah. When the way he talks, it also talks about in interviews now, he called the Prime Minister a wanker the other day.
I thought you could see that. That is such a huge thing.
He mentions Buckminster Phillips.
Yeah, he does.
Yep. And so you plant seeds. I mean, the movement could literally dissipate within a couple of years and vanish into obscurity, but that doesn't mean that we haven't done an enormous amount to set things in motion. There might be another organization much more efficient than us that comes along that could move this forward. But so never think about it in terms of the success of this institution. It's always about how you can plant those seeds.
Robbie Williams mentioned it once.
Yeah, that was Zeitgeist Film.
All right, yeah.
So did Muse.
And Ronnie Sullivan, yes.
Russell Brand said in response, is it Dan? It's like, wants to know how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, like a 5-year plan. You know, but Russell Brand, he was being asked this, and he's like, well, I don't have all the answers, but it's one of those things. Anything that's supposed to happen will just happen eventually, because we're living organisms. You know, it's without sounding too spiritual, and you know, but anything that's supposed to happen will happen. People will eventually have enough.
If they have the tools. You know, obviously if there's no tools, if they don't know what to move forward to, then what have we seen? We've seen one collapse after another leading to, I mean, World War II, Adolf Hitler came in and lifted that entire economy out of nothing, and then he took it in a very wrong direction. If he hadn't gone into war, he would be considered in history one of the greatest, you know, renovators of
government houses.
Yeah, well, so they don't have the tools though. If you don't have the tools, you just lead right back in the same system. What are they going to do in the Philippines? They're going to build the same crappy structure.
Exactly the first thing I said. But I completely agree, and I have a friend who works at the David Icke channel, for example, doing a science show and things, and I've asked him to get my foot in the door so I can go on there and have an interview on it, and I want to call Russell Brand and hopefully get him come down for Z-Day and have a chat. You know, all of these different things flutter through our minds, but predominantly people I see sometimes on Facebook, they say, we should do this. So do it.
Yeah.
What the fuck? What are you waiting for?
No, I want Phillips to do it.
Oh, no, I'll wait for you to do it. Well, if you wait for someone else to do it, it's not going to happen. You have to get up off your arse and do it yourself. You know, so we've got a room full of people here. Anybody could have picked up the phone by now and called Russell Brand. Has anyone done it? Hey, what? You've got a person, two-person. You're ruining my argument.
Bring him up and say that you're Russell Brand.
Yeah, but you follow what I mean. Is that I come to these events time and time again. We talk about these things, and be the light of change you wish to see in the world is very nice, you know, to badge to wear on your shirt, but it doesn't quantify what you actually have to do. You actually have to stay up till 2 in the morning doing lectures and burn yourself out a little bit, you know, maybe, and make 2.5-hour documentaries on nothing but coffee and beer. You know, you've got to really do it. You've got to really go for it. It's not enough to sort of sit back and come to a few meetings and then go back to your life like selling McDonald's or whatever it is, you know. So I just want to make that point because I make it time and time again, but I don't know whether it really ever hits home. So yeah, you know.
But we can spread a show that's said by the leaders more easily than, like, you say it more concisely than I could ever say it. So I would show someone you rather than explaining it myself. So I just feel like if we work with those other alternative medias in the best way possible, we can reach 10 times more.
We want to make an international lecture team. This, I just want to put this in there. Really critical importance is to reduce this small group of people that have been in the forefront globally. There's only a handful of us that really go out and speak. And there's a ton that are behind all of this, but there's only a handful of us that are doing the communication right on, or head on, and that's got to change. So when this new text comes out that's called the Zeitgeist Movement Defined, there's going to be a workbook to assist just that. So I really believe that you don't have to have a high IQ or anything to do any of this. You just have to learn it, and learn how to talk about it, and learn how to gauge the most common questions, because I guarantee you there's only maybe 30 questions that come up over and and over and over again. And you can get used to it. You can get used to it. And I'm hoping to see a huge influx of people, an army of sorts of people that can speak in their own language, in their own tongue, in their own communities, and without people having to travel anymore. And also eliminating that kind of leadership illusion that exists in the movement, unfortunately, with myself and others. That's detrimental.
I actually have a concrete answer for you, because you're very worried about audience share, which I totally understand. I suggested this in Z-Day 2012, and then I think I put the lid on it by accident. I think we should do this. There are quite a few shows in the UK, and definitely in the US, and mainly in Europe will happen too, where the audience asks questions. And they're banking on the idea that the audience is a random collection of people. I do think we should all apply to be on exactly the same questions. Can you imagine not being able to get a clearly sensible question out of any of the audience members? They seem to be going on about real stuff for a change. I think so. And the best kind of people in this movement are going to be the ones who organise it and then say, instead of going, hey, I think we should totally do this, go, blah, 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 blah. And I did this last week. And it's done, right? Then we want to hear from you. Until then, please think of something awesome and then tell us after you've done it. But I do think flash mobbing the shows that are already there, just for the sheer anger that it would produce.
Sorry, I'll try and be concise, but you've already sort of mentioned about the sort of good things in humanity and how there's lots of positive ways and people are sort of good, giving and stuff like that. My sort of question is, as this sort of progression, this sort of movement generally outside the Zeitgeist movement goes forward and sustainability comes in, we have these new sort of economic models and ways of dealing with things. How do we prevent the sort of the darker side of humanity from affecting that sort of process? Because I think a lot of times in the past, I don't want to criticize anything, I just want to say sort of ideas of how we can sort of, predict this happening in advance and prevent those sort of things happening again. So, economic models being hijacked to benefit certain technocrats, stuff like that.
Sure. I'd say on the broad scheme, anyone out there that's looking to be sustainable and efficient, I don't know how they could go too wrong with that. The only example that's historically there is the military. The military is quite paradoxically the best example of sustainability, global awareness, and efficiency, and also the worst. That's why Buckminster Fuller's contribution is so important, because he created his world game concept, which was this idea of looking at the Earth as a total system. How do you manage resources, meet the needs of the human population holistically? How do you bring all of humanity up to the haves as opposed to the have-nots, as he talked about? That was his game. Where did he get that game? It was a version of a war game. Because even when he was in the Army, I think in the Navy, I believe, he realized that the Army didn't have the market restrictions. If it needed something, it did it. And it did it fast, because it could. It's been given that carte blanche blank check, and it has the greatest engineering and scientific minds. And so that, not to jump ahead, but excuse me, not to deviate too much, but that is a very unique example of how things can go wrong. I don't know of any current technology that's out there for helping sustainability that either hasn't already been abused by the military, because they're quite advanced. If there's any new ideas emerging, they're going to grab it first. So therefore, the idea of being sustainable and efficient can only be positive. I mean, can you think of any other variation? The very idea of being sustainable and efficient.
It's sort of like I'd sort of imagine, say, if we had a centralized creation of economic models.
Oh, I see. You mean abuse?
So abuse I feel like whenever, I don't know, we all want to help, most people want to help each other, but when people get a sort of scenario where they have control over certain things, they tend to have that sort of move towards benefiting yourself or towards smaller groups.
Well, here's you can never warrant against that. And you can go back to something like, to be a sociopath, which has a very clinical definition. There are people that do the life experience that create degenerative behaviors that are really impulsive and beyond their control. And they might do something particularly destructive. In this type of model, first of all, you don't have the general reinforcement of abuse that you have in the current model. Self-interest becomes social interest.
Throw it back at yourself as well, and the way things are in the world, even at the moment, this is something you yourself have mentioned and we've talked about as well, that I'm amazed that there isn't more violence and there isn't more destruction, there isn't more, insane acts of
supermarkets.
Exactly, look, and the thing is that when people do go fucking apeshit, I mean, if somebody wants to fly a plane into a building, they're going to fly a plane into a building. Now, whether they did or not, blah blah, with 9/11, whatever. But when somebody goes into a restaurant in America and with an automatic weapon and wipes out something, it's usually because of an external force. It's not something that's just, they woke up one morning and gone, I'm going to go. It's a structural violence issue, and it's usually something to do with the market. They've lost their job. There's some problem with the family where the kids have been taken away because the system didn't sort this out. It's usually an external force on people. You know, most of the people you know don't go home and smash their apartments up and rip all the power out, and you know, maybe they don't have too much to drink, but you know, but generally, you know, people are continually projecting out about, you know, oh, other people. You know, you hear that thing, oh, you can't trust people, so you've got no friends. You know. Well, it's human nature that, no, it's, well, you know, it's not, you know, it's, most people, even in this system, they're okay, they're just struggling to get by, but they're just victims of this pressure that they're under all the fucking time, stress and structural violence.
One last point, I think it hopefully might answer what you're asking, because I think you're talking about things like industrial sabotage by the powers, right?
Well, yes, like
in Contact, where they blow up the thing that is meant to connect us to the aliens, and then they build another one. Yeah. This has actually been happening recently, and we'll stick with the internet as an example. Pippa, Actor, all that stuff that doesn't warrant real words, right? Over and over again, they try and regulate the internet in a structural way. Until now, they've failed because people damn well want their free porn. That's why I'm doing it. I don't know about you guys. But now there are quite a few. WikiLeaks just leaked one 2 days ago, like copyright enforcement around the world. You know, leveling, the Gleichschaltung, all of it, right? Now, if they do manage, if the system manages to succumb to market pressures and corporate interest, there are already people, and they have a name, who are building an alternative internet, which deliberately doesn't allow that. Again, and you have to start again. Those people already do it. I can't remember what their names are now, but it's essentially a version of the dark web. So it's going to be that immune system thing. It's like when your body reacts to an illness and it does it by, you know, fixing itself. It's the same thing when it's deliberate corporate control. The other one, which is about the information that's actually on the internet, not just the structure, is that we have to get people to be a little less credulous. For example, there is actually a Zeitgeist Movement Facebook page that is not from us. And many of you are their friends, and they post bollocks day after day from natural news and true theory and all this garbage about a boy who can see in the dark in China that was debunked 5 seconds after it was... But they keep doing it, don't they? And most people are underneath commenting going, oh, I'm going to find it very hard to believe in the Zeitgeist when they keep posting this nonsense. And if you search for 5 fucking seconds on the same website, Facebook, you'll find the actual one with all of our stuff. But I mean, it's really hard. So again, we come back to education partially. But also, yeah, essentially that sort of weird hacktivism culture that deliberately sets up new systems when the other ones become broken.
Instead of throwing money at the problem through the existing systems, you create alternative processes that help to solve.
Funded and supported by the government, we can have our own big program we can't see.
Of all the things I've heard of political interaction, if someone was to propose that and work grants, I suppose, I'm not sure how it works here in the UK, as far as how they would navigate allocation of funds to certain projects to alleviate those pressures. But that's a great intermediate solution proposal, absolutely. If people were focused on the creation of abundance to resolve things within the system in a step-by-step way, it would be amazing. I mean, Doug McLeish, he does a farm system concept, CFS, and his kind of mission statement is, I'm going to make this system, set it in motion, and it's going to make itself obsolete financially. That's what he says, which is that's great ethic.
To kill money.
What's that?
Using money to kill money.
Sure. If you can create 3D printers that produce 3D printers at large scale, that's a difficult thing to do, but with nanotechnology and the like in the future, it could be possible. You set something in motion that makes the entire need for the market in that genre obsolete. So it'd be amazing to see that type of stuff move forward. Hopefully you can move forward. You should write that proposal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Go.
So my question to you is, what could be achieved by not voting? And in terms of a resource-based economy, how would not voting get us there?
Okay, you're planting seeds that reduce confidence in the existing system. If, say, you had an election and only 5% of the population voted, that would be quite dramatic to show the apathy And I think at some point someone would come together and create organizations to express why they did that, and that would create a great deal of attention internationally. Hey, the United States had an election, 5% of the people voted. That's pretty incredible as a statement. So, Russell Brand's comment, it makes people complicit to vote in the corruption that is politics, that is this elitist preservation system that is representative democracy as we know it.
But he still pays his taxes.
Well, everyone has to pay the taxes or they'd probably go to jail. And that is the way it still works out in the color of law, and I won't go on that as far as the United States, because the tax system is a fraud, but they can do whatever they want. So, end of the story is you lose confidence. If you can perpetuate the loss of confidence of the existing system, and everyone starts to look for alternatives. What are those people going to do that don't vote? They're going to want to do something else. And as far as an RB, that would be a great transition point to show that you want to create a direct, participatory economic system. Because really, economics is the core of everything. Politics is an outgrowth of economics. Every social system in history has its underpinning in the economic model of that period, from slavery to feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism and even communism. Communism was based explicitly in its hierarchical political strategy based on how the means of production and everything was oriented. So you really just need an economic system. And then you get rid of the political elitism and so forth. So it would be a great transition if people really understood that. Now, I will say one caveat, though. There is one thing, a book by Dr. James Gilligan. He wrote a book called, I can't remember what it's called actually, but all it is a statistical analysis of structural violence as it relates to Republican and Democratic Party. And this woke me up to the basic understanding that there is a difference between the two evils. There are lesser evils, but that isn't necessarily, in other words, if you vote Republican in America and they get Republicans in office, statistically there is a massive series of problems that emerge that are that are also happen in Democratic administrations, but are much worse, and they exasperate certain negative things such as unemployment, such as public health issues and the like. So there is a basic, true, tangible difference, but that should not justify holding up the entire system. And the way I see it, as dark as this sounds, just let it go to shit. Because the faster it goes to shit, the faster people wake up to see the real truth of the matter. Why should we hold up just a little bit more public health, because this one has just a little bit less public health, when the whole thing is negative public health? It doesn't need to exist that way to begin with. So I definitely agree with that.
Also, I'd just like to say one thing about that. One thing about this system that you live under, right? The people that run it have done this fantastic job of convincing you all that you need them. Yeah? You don't fucking need them, okay? They do nothing, they produce nothing, they have no tangible skills that are relevant to the environment. And my personal view on it is eventually that one day people will just not help these people anymore. We won't go and do their plumbing. I won't fix their electrics. I won't fix, and it's kind of alluded to in Addendum where they'll just be embarrassed out of the system. Now that's a really kind of idealistic goal about the whole thing. But it's actually really, really achievable, I do this on site all the time, if the plumbers or the carpenters give me grief, I'll just switch the electricity off and say, now use your fucking drills. We have the power. Yeah. So I kind of see, I'd really like to see that, a kind of a transition away, and this is where the information comes in, where you realise that actually, we don't need them. We need, you've got to be kind to them as people, even though they're kind of fucking nutcases. But eventually, it's kind of like with the Alex Jones thing. It's like I ignore those sort of people. I ignore Stephen Molyneux because you're not going to change. We're going to drag them along, kicking and screaming into the future. They'll still, they're like the Luddites of the past to me. And hopefully there will be a transitional period where enough people. It doesn't take a lot. A certain percentage to run everything who are running things. We can actually transition away from that in a kind of almost humane way, where it doesn't have to be, this constant war of fighting amongst each other, and really, maybe it does need to go to shit, really, but
The problem is that they have the resources.
Of course, but they only have it because we facilitate their ownership of the resources.
We have to drive the resources somewhere, don't we? People have to dig it out of the ground. The guys who make the machines. Right. If we stop cooperating with these people, it'd be over.
I've got a really quick point on voting. You mentioned voting, and that's where the conversation started. I was having a conversation with a guy in the pub just the other week, and I'm kind of the mindset that yes, to not vote is a good idea. I used to be the mindset that voting was a good idea, and that everybody should vote. I've changed my opinion on that. He has this idea that someone, I don't know what you guys think of it, just be interested to hear what you thought. Someone should run for mayor in London that is absolutely, utterly outside of that whole bullshit system. Where you say, look, okay, I'll run for mayor, and I am one of you guys. Here's the campaign. And yeah, but you think we could do that in London because you don't have to go through that system. You don't have to go through Labour, Conservative, anything. Anybody can run for mayor.
Someone did it in New Zealand.
Yeah, I think the time is right now. Like, everybody like, I hate this guy, I'll vote for this guy. And even if you don't believe in voting as such, you would disrupt it so hugely and piss everybody off.
There's actually a party that have just started up here in this country called the Money Free Party. And we did an event with them last month. They're running for local office. And yeah, their objective is really just to kick up a bit of a shitstorm and go around the doorsteps. And they put forward the case that their local election is totally winnable. And they'd get my vote if they're running for office around here. So I think, yeah, in that sense it would be kind of worth it. And Brand said, well, you know, what's the point in voting? None of them are worth voting for. Well, if one was worth voting for, at least you said that, come on, the whole thing's a bloody farce, so vote for me. That would be hilarious. So I think that's the best kind of fuck you we could mount, really.
A lot of dichotomous issues as far as how the money is allocated, to what degree. That's for a whole other conversation. How that would actually be implemented is a very different conversation. But
yeah, Oliver, it's Oliver.
Yes.
Gulliver, if you believe Facebook. I can give you an example where it wasn't just done with money as well. It's Bogota, Colombia. Who's going to start nodding their head? Anatakas Mokus, his name is. Is he a politician? No, he's a former university lecturer who got elected as mayor of the city. What did he do? There was a huge problem with jaywalking. This sounds really meaningless compared to the universal basic income, but I think it's part of it. Huge problem with jaywalking, traffic issues, people getting hurt, but people did it anyway. And even when they brought in fines, that wonderful market incentive didn't work. People didn't care. What they did care about was when Mokus hired 200 mimes to take the piss out of them as they did so. So they're crossing the street, there's a guy with a white face behind them going, "Oh, look at me walking." And what happens? It drops. There are no problems with jaywalking anymore because it was done through embarrassment. It was done through shame.
If we have to, the only reason why people go to work is to pay their mortgage. So how do we empower ourselves to avoid getting into debt?
That's tough, because the whole system works against you, as I talked about in Zeitgeist Addendum. It's a game of musical chairs. The system's a dominant force. You know, it's funny, you bring that up as an aside. I get this argument from statists, like I say, oh, it's because the state owns money, which isn't that's actually true. Most central banks collude and produce the money. The state just gives the legal bind to only have one currency. And even if you had competing currencies, it wouldn't do anything. It would actually make things particularly annoying if you imagine having to convert things constantly with different vendors. But if you produce money, let me clarify this just for everyone who doesn't understand that this system creates more debt than money that can be repaid. And it is a consequence of the market. If you produce money and you loan it at interest, money is a good, right? A bank is a corporation, a company I should say, and money is produced as a good. How do you get profit off of a good that is money, where profit is money? Well, you charge interest on it. So you charge interest on it, but you're paying for something with that very thing. So how do you loan out $100 at 10% interest and then expect $110 back when there's only $100 in circulation? Because you've only created that money through that loan. So everyone is basically in this scam known as the debt system. And that should be readily acknowledged, frankly. I mean, how do you change that? I mean, again, people argue we just create a system without debt. They're not thinking this through. Because you can't respect the marketization of life, the marketization of everything, and then change the banking system to produce money without interest charge because the banks don't make any money. So how do you do that? I've yet to hear anyone explain that to me. Otherwise, you'd have to create and produce income. You'd have to give it into the system. Somehow you have to supplement it into the system based on some level of demand. But the banks wouldn't make any money that way, which means they'd have to be socialized, right? Which I guess you could do that, but that wouldn't be the market anymore. So it's a conundrum of thought when you talk to people that say this stuff. So it's the market that's responsible for the debt increase because of this phenomenon of interest charge for money, and the interest doesn't exist in the money supply. So I think everybody should be protesting against the debt and interest system explicitly, which is kind of why I did that whole huge section addendum. Like, you gotta be kidding. We live in a whole system that's designed to keep the lower classes low. And then what do the rich get? They put dividends in, they get stock options, they put, you know, they have savings and IRA accounts, and they make interest money off of just having money to begin with. So guaranteed class stratification and elitism. How do you stop that? You got to get rid of the market. I mean, that's, or you can, again, socialize and divide and make market socialism in that way.
Have you heard of positive money, mate?
Positive money?
Positive money, yeah. Check out their website, okay, because these people are pushing a non-debt-based monetary system, yeah? We've done some work with them. Jim done a presentation with them. So, you know, again, you wouldn't have seen those kind of organisations a few years ago, you know? Okay, it's not exactly what we want, but, you know, it's a step in the right direction, and the issues being raised, and again, profile in the media, these things are being talked about, even in the mainstream, you know? And that would be another, probably a transitional move towards getting out of what we've got already, you know? The lady here.
Yeah, this question, like, how do you like make a point against privatization? Because now it seems like our government seems to be privatizing like everything, our utilities, our transport system, and now like our universal health system. And the thing is that it's a need. Like, we need to travel, so we have to pay the ridiculous high ticket prices, and we have to pay our bills. So, like, how do we like make a point against this?
I've got an answer for you. I've got a partial answer, as always. I do have all the answers, but you've got to stick around afterwards. There was a YouTube video that Jim and I came across independently today. Heat your home office for 8 pence a day. You come across this? A couple of people have written, right. Now, who facilitated us knowing all that? There's a guy online who said he's so sick of the cost of energy, which is going, what, 10 to 15% up? And that's even more than journals publishing. And so what he did was he got a couple of inverted ceramic plant pots, and this sounds like a joke, and like a metal baking tin, and 4 tea lights, and it acts like a miniature furnace, and it costs 8 pence a day because tea lights are, well, thanks to the market, they're really cheap. So this guy has put that video on YouTube. Hey guys, look at this. You can fuck the energy companies without going outside with your stupid placard and saying no, and then having them change their mind maybe a year later instead of that. So you just do that kind of stuff. It's really low fi, but I tell you what, it has a massive impact when you're not paying like 100, 200, 300 pounds a month in energy bills. They see that when it happens. That's someone's bonus. It's disappearing. The other one is there's a guy in Leeds who set up a website to explain how he's going to manage to pay 0 on his heating or electricity or water for like a whole year. I wrote to him already and said, will you please come on the radio? So there are these weird little guerrilla activists who are like giving you little tips on how to chip away at this. Now, when it comes to healthcare, it's much more difficult because you can't just fix a broken bone at home, can you? We do rely heavily. I was in hospital last week because I was in a huge car crash, and in the ambulance I was talking to them already about what it means to have driverless cars, and how this would happen. But then they wouldn't have a job taking me to hospital, and so what kind of system would that be? Like, you can only ask them. I've preached inside a fucking ambulance. I think that's quite good.
You deliberately had the crash.
Yeah, I did. I was like, no, I need to reach some people. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really tough with the NHS. With that, I would resort to blunt force trauma of activism of all kinds. Talking to your GP about it for a start is one thing, but it's very difficult to find. Healthcare cooperatives is the only thing I can think of where people like locally, like GPs who are sick of it, they do it in their spare time, things like that. But that's again only GPs, then you've got things like surgery, so it's really tricky with that one, particularly because health is so immediate. But with energy, that's already a big one, because I think that there would be some of the energy companies are also the owners of the systems that are now being sold off to the NHS. They're not always different people. And if they start seeing a real decline in their income, and energy's a big one, it might make them think twice about what might happen if they try and sell off NHS too much. That's one angle, it's one very...
As well for not paying a TV licence. I've managed, and they said they're going to leave me alone for 2 years.
Really? That's another one. It's only it's 100 and something a year, isn't it?
A bit of research, there's quite a few loopholes.
There is actually, yeah, and they do work as well because it's a non-contractual thing. However, I come down on the side of having a TV license because it means at least it's not done through advertising, which ruins my daughter's head, or they have a little bit more. They're a little bit more separate from the government because it's not done through tax. If you want to see what happens when state TV exists, any of the US channels or indeed the Australian channels, you can see the difference that it has, especially when it comes to things like the war. Our BBC fought, you forget that. The BBC sucks in a lot of ways, but it fought like hell, at the risk of losing its charter, to say this is a load of bullshit. They couldn't have done that if they were directly funded. However, if you can't afford it, do that as well.
Yeah, what do you think are the sort of biggest obstacles towards transitioning to a resource-based economy? Because, like from a social perspective, I think the fact that there's so much apathy in the world and sort of ignorance about, if you talk to someone about a resource-based economy, they'll say, I know it would never work due to, technological ignorance. And then obviously there's issues like nationalism, patriotism. So what are your thoughts on that?
I thought you kind of answered the question in a very good way. There's so many interfering value systems out there that aren't associated, have no relationship with what a sustainable environmental condition or a sustainable culture means. They don't see it. Everyone's locked into their individualistic worlds. They have hard enough time dealing with themselves, dealing with their family. Why would they engage in activism? Activism is sort of a luxury in a lot of ways if you think about it. It's a great deal of strife goes into this type of work. So you have to create, and I hate to sound redundant, but it's all about showing people that there is a different path and having them want it. I use this example in the talk in Berlin. It's not the most accurate example, but I think it applies a little bit. There's a study that was done about how primates react when one primate is given something better, a better treat than the other. So you have two primates performing a small little act. They're giving a piece of watermelon, for example. And they're like, okay, we're having fun, we're taking watermelon. And then the other guy gets something really, really cool, like tapioca. And then the other primate sees the guy get the tapioca, and then once he's handed the watermelon, he pushes it away. He's like, fuck that, I want the tapioca. That's an issue of equality and how we think about this social relationship. And I think it works on the same level of experience, where if you see, like that's me, I walk around just tortured constantly. All I see when I walk around is inefficiency. It's an unfortunate reality of my condition now. I'm miserable basically 24 hours a day. So I think if you can show what's really possible, and it is feasible if people make the decision for it, they'll begin to come aboard. But that's, again, that's the complication of it all, is how to do that.
Yeah, a lot of people bring that up, the apathy of other people, the ignorance of other people, the sheep, or there's all these insulting terms that people use and project it out to other people. But I always say to them, what, so you were born with this knowledge, were you? You were born this enlightened being that was going to move towards this new social system? No, you don't. You got this information somewhere along the line. Everything's emergent, everything's connected. All this information you picked up from somebody else, yeah? And that's what you've got to do. You just got to go out and talk to the apathetic people, because you were once an apathetic person. Yeah? It's really easy to push the blame out on the others, but it's our job. I mean, I talk about this stuff every day at work or whatever. At home, my poor wife. But yeah, you live it. You talk about it. It becomes part of who you are. You will not give in to them. Think of Winston Smith. You're not going to give in. You're going to build a better future, and that's how you have to have that vision. Of course, there's everybody's in a difficult economic situation. They're in different social systems. They might be living under a religious system that's oppressive. But at the end of the day, that's the way it gets out there. That's how socialism spread. That's how communism spread. That's how all those ideas spread. This is how people got the vote. Women didn't have the vote until relatively recently. But we just expect change that much quicker, but it's going to take a bit of time. But if you look from 5 years ago to now, you've got to admit that the level of awareness is increasing. And our friend Mr. Brand, when people like him bring it up, it starts to get fucking talked about, and people start questioning it, and people talk to each other, and that's what you've got to do. If you want to live in a community, you talk to each other.
I'd also say sometimes it's hard to quantify. You think, oh, I didn't work with that person. I got a message from a lad I used to teach at secondary school who the start of his message was, I always thought you were completely fucking mental. You know? And you kept on going on about this Zeitgeist film and everything, and you know, I didn't want to watch it and everything. Well, I finally forced myself 4 years down the line to watch it the other day, and you bastard, you were right, weren't you? So, and then various other people have done the same thing. You know, they didn't see the sense in it initially, and then they come back and something else changed in their life, and it moves them in that direction, because our system is a collapse sequence, so it is going to go in that direction, and as it goes in more preposterous, ridiculous, you know, levels of inequality and all the other problems that we're all very familiar with, people will, you know, join the dots slowly, as long as people are out there communicating this message to them. If you're not communicating an alternative, then what have they got? What have they got to look for? So as the collapse sequence takes hold, there needs to be a safety net of almost consciousness, I hate to use that word, that's basically ready there to catch people and say, we don't actually have to like kill each other in a ball of flames. We could actually create an abundant, sustainable planet for everyone. We could actually do that. So I think that's important to grab hold of just when you think you're not really making waves, I think.
It's also, because we live such short lives, I have to remind you at this point in the evening, we forget. We forget, well, it's a little bit less now. We forget that those notions like nationalism, the things that really are a big problem, right? Those sort of group mentalities, I think they're a lot weaker than they used to be.
Yeah.
And bear in mind also, Tom said this point, I only realised this consciously myself recently, all of your rights, whether it's to do with the rights of women not to be beaten, or to vote, or for blacks to be able to work, or any of that shit, did it ever come from the right? Did any of it ever come from... None of it came. It all came from what's traditionally called the left wing anyway, and it's then reappropriated and destroyed by the right, which is actually something that Brand said himself. All of that stuff has always been asked for. It's never been granted. It's always been taken. Now, listen.
We're listening.
While we're all here. Some of those things that you're worried about used to be much worse, they're better now. And now it's the turn of the big universal general right to life of humans and the planet as well. In fact, a river recently got rights. Did you see this? A river has rights in a country. In Bolivia. There we go. Again, we're talking South America. How interesting. So these all seem cartoonish in abstraction, but they are all, I think they all do fight like a weird kind of immune system against the things like patriotism and nationalism. You don't defeat patriotism and nationalism by saying a country sucks, or it sucks less than the others. You defeat it in a roundabout way by being global citizens anyway, by travelling. And it's no accident that the most hegemonic systems with the most ingrained people are the ones who travel the least, aren't they? Peter. I'm not saying it's you, but come on, man. Like, most people don't have passports in the States. It's not an accident, right? It's not because they're not adventurous people. They got there through adventure. So, yeah, it sort of gets roundabout.
I'd say one final thing regarding apathy is something, a trick that I use when I speak with people. And by the way, as far as the right and the left, if someone you meet calls themselves a conservative, they're basically in an act of retardation. It means they're stopping any progress. If you're conservative, it means you don't want to change anything, basically, by principle. And that's literally a state of mental denial retardation. I mean that was clinical possible. So, apathy, here's the game I play with apathetic people. If I meet someone that has a kid, I'm like, oh, you have a child, oh, interesting. So you are not concerned about the fact that you have a child, and that child's going to grow up in this world, you do not care about the state of this world that your child is going to be susceptible to. That usually gets their head ringing a little bit. And then if they don't have a kid, I say, oh, you have a family? Oh, yeah, I have a sister. And they say, well, does your sister have kids? You have a nephew or a niece? And usually that happens. You generate this linear sense of synergy. And then the farthest extension of that, and I won't go on this whole spiel, is you realize that the whole world has a synergistic causality. And if a bomb blows up in a coffee shop in America and kills my sibling, that could come from anywhere based on the oppression and deprivation that exists in the world, which means we're all subject to the violence that the system creates. We can never predict it. We can never predict when, say, the lower echelon of poverty succumbs due to low socioeconomic status heart disease, which is clinically proven to affect the lower classes. If you can look at a chart of income, and you can actually see mortality rise as income lowers. It's because of relative and absolute deprivation, which I won't go into. If you can get those points across and see that everyone's vulnerable to this, especially now with a world that's so interconnected, then you can get a lot of headway. Anyone out there that thinks individualistic and thinks that they're unsusceptible, even the most wealthy people, they're not. There's a film I saw recently that is violent. I don't recommend that attribute of it, but it engaged a really excellent portrayal of structural violence. It's called Assault on Wall Street. I recommend someone watch it because it depicted this poor guy who lost everything to the financial collapse in America, left with no recourse but to behave violently for his own sense of redemption. And that's how the brain naturally operates. So we're all susceptible to being killed or hurt in this system as long as we have these high levels of inequality. So no one is immune.
It's just I just wanted to comment on what Tom said. I only learned about Zeitgeist through a couple of years ago through travel, and like you, I get out every day. I've got some cards there if you want to give them out later. That's how I do it, using that stuff.
Yeah, would say please do check out Michael's work. There's some cards here for Art for a Sustainable World. So have a look at that. He paints TVs and old recycled sorts of things and takes them out into the street. It's a sort of message which is
always something good on.
Yeah, always something good on.
Just talking on the last point that you said about the oppression and that we're all able to be killed because of the system. I just wondered what you thought of what we do to animals by eating them. That is the very violence that we're trying to stop for our own species, but for our choices we're doing it to other animals.
It's an industry, the inhumane treatment of animals, which is clear. First of all, let's go to the lower tier. Clearly we have evolved as omnivores, and there's a high propensity for people to still engage in eating meat, as has been historically, as in the course of our evolution. I do believe that over the course of time, humans will see numerous reasons not to eat meat at all. I'm not advocating vegetarianism based on principle. I think it's more environmentally friendly. I think it's more sustainable. I think it's actually more healthy in many ways. But when you break it down to where we are now, this industry is brutal, man. We're doing all sorts of crazy things to keep meat and these goods moving, hormones and everything else, disease. Monocultures that use to feed all the cattle that are destroying the land. The causality is unbelievable. So in that regard, you have to blame the system as far as the inhumane treatment. When you go to an indigenous tribe that actually values the death of an animal before it eats it, you see this, and it's like almost a pleasant ritual. It might not be the greatest thing. I would prefer to photosynthesize sunlight, but I can't. I would love to be able to photosynthesize sunlight, not ever have to eat any form of life, but I can't. So we're stuck in a particular evolutionary paradigm, which I don't criticize that. I criticize the market for being absolutely indifferent to life because that's what it does in its common execution of industry.
I think we've got to take power back, and everyone should research the health benefits, and actually all the health organisations are saying that we can live very well on a vegetarian and vegan diet, and that it's our own choices, and each time you pick a bit of meat you're killing an animal, and we're trying to create here a system good for humans, and we need to think about others and not just our own species, because if we were that animal, we wouldn't give a bullshit about what someone says.
I'll extend it to biodiversity. The whole agricultural system, which is enormous on this planet and very primitive, is really disrupting biodiversity on multiple levels. It's messing with the atmosphere. So I don't use the moral argument that killing animals is wrong. I'll make that very clear, because life has been feeding on life ever since evolution has moved forward. But I will say that there are other alternatives. We don't need a brutal industry as it exists with the market system and profit and the negligence of our environment and the well-being and just the respect of the basic animal life and the torture that goes on in these horrible industries. That's unacceptable. But that's also a natural consequence of where we are within the market sickness.
Yeah, but the difference is, Peter, that animals only take what they need.
Sure.
What we want.
Well, that's
We
again.
an awful lot from the animal world.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, the Native Americans. It's different. It's the animals who take too much die out. That's why we don't see it.
Yes. And what happens when you have a system based on growth and constant consumption and taking and need to hoard and the fear of scarcity and greed and fear, we're behaving this way because our system, our environment is reinforcing that behavior.
Just like a final point on that, I'd just say everyone look up that it is healthy to do it. So if it's healthy, why would you choose to be cruel to an animal?
I agree.
So I
think
everyone should look into that.
Of course, you can unsustainably grow soy as well.
So the sustainability thing isn't defeated, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we had Matt Berkowitz on the show doing this, didn't we? We talked about how a pound of grain and what that needs to create a pound of meat, so much more grain.
Yeah.
But you can still be unsustainable in a vegan way.
You know also that the meat industry is the second biggest producer of greenhouse gases.
That's right.
So
good place to start.
Which is exactly what was my original point. There are numerous ecological reasons that we should move away from it, not just moral principles and the like, which I'm not amoral, but I take a very literal stance. I think of what works and what doesn't work, what is causing problems and destabilization and what isn't. I look at slavery as amoral, I suppose. I also look at it from the standpoint that it didn't work. Slavery didn't work. It's a very bold statement. I get a lot of hate mail probably for this, because it didn't work. And meaning that there's no slave-owning societies that didn't have massive slave rebellions. There's no circumstance in that environment of oppression that it will stand the test of time, or it will sustain and be even. You're always going to have horrible bloodshed in a type of oppressive society, which, by the way, I'm looking around, I'm looking at the charts and the trends in the current market economy. We have an enormous number of protests that are exponentially increasing as time moves forward. Is that not a similar type of rebellion? I think it is. I think people are beginning to realize there's other ways, and that there is an inherent inhumane nature to the system, not as equal as abject slavery, but there are more slaves in the world than ever before as defined by the United Nations, with human trafficking, sex slavery, all within the bounds of the market. And it's just let go, because these economies thrive on it in these horrible, poor regions that have been brutalized throughout time, because wars usually they end up with recourse.
Question.
Well, I was just point that if we are actually asking for a shift of values, so changing your bank account, you know, who you might bank with, and changing maybe some of the energy, even though we know that we need to change the system, we're also going to change our values at the same time. I think that actually bears a very strong argument towards veganism and vegetarianism and away from meat, which is a horribly despotic and wasteful practice. So
who's the most ethical bank now? Because Cooperative sold out, haven't they?
Yeah.
I've got a good story for you. One of my friends went to Durham University, and they were at one point in the early 2000s deciding on which money system to use to fund the university union. And the argument was, it was a room about this big as well. They were like, we don't want to use people like MBNA because that's just credit. They wasted on arms dealing and all the rest of it. We want to use co-op. Cooperative bank's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. They put the point. And somebody in the bank, excuse me, you do know that Co-op's back end is still exactly the same back end as MBNA, so actually you're still using that, but you're now disguising it, so it's sort of the same. And there was this weird silence in the room. And then someone said, "Get him!" I thought you'd like it. But look, I mean, Jim is sort of right, he's half right, as we all are, that you can try and choose a more, quote, ethical bank. It'll be a minor point, but it is a vote away from the big ones.
Triodos.
Triodos, yes, Zeitgeist Amsterdam does a lot with them as well. They've actually, I think they've even done so far as to organise events where people from Triodos have helped. So there are some of these, what is it, the other ones? Local, no, what are they called? Credit unions?
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin's not bad as well. I don't know enough about Bitcoin, but yeah, I mean, but they will all be a vote. Don't be under the apprehension, I don't think anybody in this room would be, that it's somehow really an ethical bank, because as long as you're still deferring everything back to money, you still have the same problems. But the attempt is definitely worth it. Triodos would be it's the best example I can think of someone better than Co-op.
Yeah, I don't need to stress past some other people's time.
You again, I thought you left.
I was going to ask this at afterwards, but I thought this might be a question everyone else might benefit from. But Peter, I'm curious to know, like, specifically, what is your methodology when it comes to researching? Like, literally, like, how do you build up your idea vocabulary?
You just read.
I understand that, but I'm sure you make notes. I'm just curious to know, how do you actually go through?
How do I make a movie or something? Maybe how do I write a lecture?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just when you're researching, because the ideas we deal with are global. There's always more that we can know. Do you literally go through books and make notes page by page? Like, I'm just curious to know.
Okay. Well, all right.
Might be simple to you, but for a lot of people,
well, it's a very arduous thing. You have to start somewhere. I read an enormous amount of stuff, and when I prepare, I look at everything from the standpoint of digestion. So I don't just haphazardly read. The first thing I do, I read anything. Say I'm reading a text on public health, and I want to do a talk on it. I annotate everything that strikes me, particular sentences or research. I physically, with my hand, write everything back out into a book after I'm done. Everything I'm annotated goes right into a book. And I categorize every single subject in a particular category. I put all of that together, and then I go to every other book that I'm using, and I make this enormous catalog matrix of categories, reference notes, page numbers to the books, and sources. And then from there I have pretty much everything that I need to move forward and think about a particular subject based on the research that I put forward. That's about it. And if you do that though, you're organizing thought, you're just categorically organizing things easier for yourself. And obviously you end up following sources simultaneously. So the majority of the books that I read, they have sources. Hopefully, I don't like reading any books without any sources. That's a big red flag when you find a book that has no sources. And I go straight to that book. So I get that book. I do the exact same thing. And I find other sources that link to sources, that link to sources, and you end up with this enormous chain. And then you just keep the categorical association, and then usually I have a big board, I have big lines that go to everything. And that's how I end up with the highly condensed, concise things that I talk about.
Is that how you plan your film as well?
Yes.
Is it true that your next film is going to be a sort of fiction thing?
It's a live action film, yeah, 3 parts. It will be...
Why are you moving away from what you're really good at?
I'm not moving away.
You watch sculpturing? The reason that I'm suggesting, because I know Ben mentioned to you some of these other RBE sort of things, not just the Venus Project. I posted something yesterday on Facebook saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if the Venus Project and everyone within the Zeitgeist Movement and all of these other One Planet Project and all of these all got together and all put their energies into creating a resource, what we can achieve.
Well, we all are. We all are.
But in your current way of making documentaries, they're the most powerful films I've ever seen in my life.
I appreciate that. And I'm not going to deviate away from that communicative oomph. The live action thing is a documentary in its own right, but I'm using a very different method of communicating as opposed to traditional interview-based documentary. I don't want to give too much away with it, but it's going to be, I think, extremely effective. It's highly sourceable. There's going to be a book that goes along with it that describes exactly what the point of everything was. Again, I don't want to give too much away with it, so don't think it's some massive deviation per se. Also keep in mind that I walk an interesting line. There's so many different angles to this type of conversation. Culture in Decline, that very haphazard public access parody I put out, takes a completely different angle to try and communicate these ideas. So I'm just doing one other angle. So this live action thing is a very different approach, because you have to keep hitting people from different sides.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question about, we're talking about morality. I was going to ask, are you familiar with Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape?
I know of it, I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with Harris and a lot of his ideas. I get where he's coming from, the scientific-based morality.
Oh, well, yeah, you kind of answered my question. I was going to say that although probably both parties, the Zeitgeist Movement and Harris himself, would probably deny that they agree with each other, to me, they really, really fit very well. Because morality has to be about the well-being of conscious creatures.
Well, it has to be about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
The ethic is really a long historical view of what is working, what is maintaining ecological and cultural sustainability. If you have a social system or if you have certain biases or bigotries that create imbalance and create instability, clearly that is a signature of unsustainability.
Yeah.
And science, of course, is the ultimate, I would say science is both a measure and an existing amalgamation of all the laws of nature that we have. That is going to tell you most explicitly what's working and what isn't. So that's why we have all these beautiful public health things that happened in the past 100 years of people like Richard Wilkinson and James Gilligan. They're talking about science as related to human development. How there really are alarm bells, there really are things that probabilistically you can see what's going to happen to people over the course of time if they're subject to certain levels of deprivation, which is unstable, which is destabilizing. Therefore, get rid of the causes of that if you can. And that's the beauty of the new models. We can do this. No one has to live these ways. No one has to create this type of neuroses and conflict and everything else, behavioral, structural violence and the like. So I agree entirely.
Another question over there.
Yeah, just who will benefit most from a resource-based economy when you consider that the majority of the world's resources actually come from Africa. And the way the situation is dealt with at the moment is because they are a debt-based victim of the economy. They will become the new kings of the resource economy.
Not necessarily. Material invention, material understanding and the way we've been able to synthesize new resources for specific purposes, I think over time will diminish the number of elements we actually need for most actions. You won't, I think the perfect example, it's a little crude, is this table is made out of wood, it's made out of metal molding. It could be made out of one solid polymer with pretty much the exact same hardness. It could be made in one molded extrusion. It could be printed out in one layer into one very low intensive, highly abundant materials, very simple processes. I think it's a complex subject. I talk about this in my lecture, which I hope you can watch. I talk about the efficiency of production, the efficiency of the use of materials. And we don't do that in our current culture. Everything's divided, no one's working together, and we don't actually apply the true scientific awareness that we have to make the most efficient use of basically the 92 elements of the periodic table and the natural resources. So Africa would be left alone probably to a large degree because it's being exploited right now, and has been through colonialism, not as much debt. It's just been raped and pillaged. It's just been brutalized. It's the dark continent. No one was aware of it. That's why I made that joke in the last Culture in Decline. What's the greatest free market? Which continent has had the greatest free market exploitation? And it was the continent of Africa, which land and even people have been taken from this continent and exploited for money. So the causality, in other words, my friend, is it's not just about debt, it's about exploitation. And in the future, there's so many other resources out there, and there's so many other ways of managing resources. It will not be, frankly, it'll be localized. I have a very strong feeling, federalization is doing more and more with less, that this whole kind of global awareness system actually will materialize in local pockets, because people will not need to extract diamonds and stuff all the way from over here and bring them for a specific purpose, because they can synthesize them right there, which you can synthesize diamonds now as far as the properties. So there's dramatic changes if we were really attempting to be efficient.
Localization, I think, in a word, would be the way to go. It's obviously a more efficient practice if you can localize and not harvest things in Africa and bring them over. But in response to your first statement, who would benefit from a resource-based economy, it has to be everyone. Because your health is linked to everybody else's and the planet and the synergistic point of view. So that's the nature of it. It won't be the case of what is actually happening now, which is pillaging Africa so that we can all live on the high hog. That's what has to go, because it's inherently unsustainable.
There's a podcast, Dan Harris actually put me onto it, KMOs, it's called Sea Realm. It's one of the good ones. Was he, wasn't it, sir?
Dan Harris is the guy in Australia, but I know the guy you're talking about.
Which Dan are you then?
Smith.
Good God, I thought it was Dan. Okay, maybe it's not you. Okay, fine. Sorry. Another Dan. Hey, Dan. We're all Dans. And they've recently had a guy on saying, when KMO, the chap who runs the show, in a fairly decent way explained the Zeitgeist Movement. I actually crashed my car during this episode, so I haven't heard the second half. He said, it's the whole goal of the Zeitgeist Movement, or of a resource-based economy, in fact, is to raise the standard of living for everyone way more than acceptable, and all the rest of it. The man who is a social scientist who's read a lot of stuff and talked a lot said that was ridiculous. Now, we know the next argument that's about to happen, which is that if you would have been alive in the time of King John, any of the things you're describing about today would have been laughed off as ridiculous as well. So when someone comes back at you and says, what, so it has to work for everyone, it'll never work for everyone, the next thing you say, well actually, we have in fact solved vast problems before, even in the very suboptimal market we have now. So don't allow their incredulity to be an argument, because it's not backed up by any historical evidence.
Just to answer your question in an abstract way, that Martin Luther King made a famous statement. I signed my emails off with it. Look, we live together, we learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we die together as fools. That's it.
And his friend
it has to
Bay,
work for everybody, or it's going to work for nobody.
His friend Bayard Rustin said it even quicker. He was the guy who actually made Martin Luther King non-violent. Martin Luther King had a gun in his house until Rustin. Rustin said, he said it like this, he's got it on tape as well. He said, "We are all one, and if we don't realise that, we're going to find out the hard way."
Yeah.
And it's the greatest one line there is, isn't there? We're all one, and you better fucking be ready for it, because we are one, right? It's almost a threat. Right. Oneness, unity, the man with the unity shirt. Unity threat. Don't agree with us? What? Sorry.
Anybody else? Question? Anybody got a point?
Show me that.
I have a question about the Green Party. Wouldn't they be a better option than not voting? Because they're quite in line with Zeitgeist values. For example, the former head of UK Green Party got arrested at a protest against fracking, and they support basic income.
Absolutely. We did a media festival in Los Angeles this year, and the Green Party was represented. The local Green Party was there. Again, the movement is an umbrella. It's not trying to exclude, but it's trying to keep the focus of the emergence of a new social system. And I've talked to a lot of people with the Green Party, so there's no, it's just to the extent of how far they're willing to go in support of seeing money and business as the huge problem that it is. I know they talk about crony capitalism and talk about abuse and greed and all the things that have led to so many environmental issues and the like. And clearly, I would love to see all the political constructs out there, anyone associated with actual environmental relationships. That's who really should be in the forefront of management if we wanted such a thing anyway. So I completely agree.
Was that Caroline Lucas? Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
we've actually done an event with Caroline about 4 years ago, yeah. And, you know, she's on board with this, you know, she sees it. She's just trying to do her bit within the system itself, you know.
Right.
So,
what's the better option, Green Party or not voting?
For sure, it's
a healthy dose of both, I would say. Some people vote green and some don't. Maybe.
Again, more, you know, awakening in the population and pushing these ideas. You know, I mean, other European countries have had substantial green candidates voted into their parliaments, and they've had effect because obviously they have a different voting system as well, which is, you know, that's first past the post bullshit. But anyway, sorry.
I think if we had 5% voter turnout that only voted green, that would be fucking awesome. that would be an ultimate decry. So, any question?
Yeah, you know, on the topic of consumption in a resource-based economy, the idea is you go to a shop, you can pretty much take what you need for free and then walk out. Do you think there need to be any sort of preventative measures in place to, you know, really determine what is, you know, the finite threshold of, okay, now I'm consuming too much, or is it literally just, you know?
Well, let's think about it. Rather than the narrow abstraction of just someone, and as we would see today, who would have an incentive to go into a store and grab lots of TVs and run out with them, why would someone do that in a model that has no property relationship? It's an access relationship. Why would someone do that when they have no resale value for those goods? This question came up in Germany, and I said the only exception I can think of is if someone has an art project.
They want 20 TVs.
And so, that kind of allowance can be made. I mean, that is a different angle. And I think there will be such overrun, meaning there's such an overrun of everything that's there. It's already accounted for the possibility that there might be a high level increase in demand. And what does someone do with all of that? The ethic of this system, which I think will be guided by, just like we walk down the street, you see someone litter, usually someone says, hey, don't fucking litter, that's rude. The same type of ethic with this would be reinforced too. You would see people, you went into someone's house and had all this stuff just hoarded in there, when you have this big recycling platform to make sure we can reuse everything to keep sustainability going, which really is the lifeblood of human existence. That type of ethic will be seen as well. But let's say there was a circumstance. Let's say that there was something that happened. How would you equate that? I would create an equation to the effect that, okay, you have this good, and you have X number of them currently in existence. If someone took X number of them, and that number could not be replicated to apply to every single person in that local region, meaning if not all 200,000 people in a given city can have the exact number that that single person got, then that would mean that they've moved in an unsustainable way. And maybe in the inventory system a red flag goes up. There would be some form of rights in this system because there could be other levels of abuse, but I think they'd be very, very small, not even worth considering legal or anything like that. I call them access rights. Let's imagine for a moment that there are certain instances because people can act in non-rational ways. This is not a utopia. Let's assume that you have a motorcycle and you're driving down the street and you park the motorcycle, you're running in to do something, somebody has some whim and maybe they drank a little too much, they jump on your motorcycle and take off, right? So they just took access of yours. It's not a property relationship. But if that person did that so many times, there might be reasons to evaluate that type of behavior. How that evaluation works out would be more of an interview than someone being arrested. You know what I mean? You deal with these things very, very humanely. So there are caveats. I try my best these days not to be simplistic. If you ever hear anyone say that prisons, no police, that's probably not going to be the reality of it. There's going to be issues that come up in conflicts, but there will be resolution programs to let those things move forward. And I don't think anybody would hoard and take a bunch of stuff.
We have examples of this right now, actually. Our water is paid on a flat fee basis, is it not? So who leaves the tap on all day? We have a tendency to understand that that's fucking stupid, right? Yeah. Why do we recycle when it's not rewarded at all and doesn't even work properly? But we do, don't we? There's that. Human beings are actually pretty great. All you have to do is allow them to be, which really is the whole point of everything we do.
Or you could say something slightly different. Where people could drink as much as they want. Damage.
Well,
alcohol.
Yeah. I think that comes into
play.
Well,
the more they drink, the more they fall asleep.
That's probably a good thing. Yeah.
By the way, binging is a matter of scarcity. Germany, where you've just been and where you apparently come from, according to the Daily Telegraph, I had to write to them. They never had a limit on drinking the way that we do, or did. The 11 o'clock curfew, by the way, was a wartime effort in World War I. We just never repealed it. Another example of not updating our values. And so we now have this bizarre binge drinking culture that fits very poorly with an island mentality on top of it. But in Europe, you just don't do that because guess what? You can calmly drink throughout the day without fear of having to stop just when the evening's getting interesting at 10:50. You know, so there is an example, in fact, of the overconsumption based on access and being treated like an adult.
But our value systems are going to be changing
at different rates.
So what we learn will change. And if our behaviours are going to be changing because we've got access to things, you have to look at, well, why were we doing that in the first place? And we were using these as a way to cover up for other things that we couldn't deal with.
The people that escapism and drinking and alcohol is in the biggest industries in the world. I mean, there's a lot of self-medicating happening out there. I wonder why. I wonder why people would have to drink themselves into oblivion because of the pressures of their system. There's a direct causality. And back to Ben's point just real fast is that if you generate prohibitive anything, it's going to flourish. If you prohibit something, it's going to flourish. We've seen that on almost every level.
We should prohibit the resource-based economy. No, you may not.
I don't know. Yeah, well, I was going to.
It's a bit of a loaded question really, but say looking into the future, like 30 or 40 years time, say everything goes well and we transition and everything's, you know, as good as it can be, do you think the population's obviously going to grow as well in that time? So say it went to about 10 billion, the only thing that's not going to change is going to be the weather, say, right. So is everyone going to want to move to the sort of regions of the world where...
Yes, I'll have the penthouse suite, please. But then I suddenly went, what the hell are you doing? The circular city design is obviously better. I like music. I get to go in and be in the middle, and there's good access routes, and you know, if I get in trouble, like medically, it's there's no car traffic jams. I can live around people. It's a community, and I was like, no, I don't want any of that shit. But where did that come from? You know, so.
I mean, I just wanted to say something about something that was said before. I mean, you know, we've all been in Tesco's or Sainsbury's, right, and seen the family with the fucking trolley stacked up to the heavens, and we've all said, you greedy bastards, you know. I mean, you've all mucked that under your breath, you know.
I did that the other week.
You know,
wrong
that, you know. Of course, you won't need to.
There was you mentioned population for one, which I think is a good point as an abstraction. Keep in mind that countries with lower with higher public health, higher standards of living have lower populations.
Sure.
And I think as time moves forward, that pressure to reproduce and the reasons for it will diminish, and you will find a steady state equilibrium. I really do believe that until we start to move off the planet, which if we succeed with our stability here, we probably will begin to terraform and do what every sci-fi person has predicted since the beginning of time. But within that, as far as relegation of land, which is by far the most scarce element, you have to accept its scarcity. And in a system where you don't have people condensing themselves into concentrated populations for labor roles, I make this point explicitly, because all of our lives are usually surrounding by where we stay in one place, or we move because of jobs, and we pile onto those freeways in the middle of the day and torture each other to get to these usually pointless jobs. That will be gone. So imagine the freedom of moving. Imagine having the whole earth as your home. Imagine a sharing network, sort of like you see with couch surfers or Airbnb, where you go online and you get to see all the vacancies. You get to have this amazing option of sharing and having responsibility and doing what you can on this planet without those types of inhibitions. That type of network, I think, will emerge. And when it comes to the type of thing that he talked about, this sort of obsession with status-driven placement, where, oh, I want that peak tip at the edge of that island, I think that will wane, because again, it's unsustainable for everyone to think that way. This is something I made in the lecture, it's not enough to think that this system will emerge as a natural outgrowth of the market economy where suddenly money just loses its value. You have to historically look at history from the future when this system's in place and say, if we don't behave in this type of orderly way, where we respect each other and grant balance and equality and think about others' interests as we don't do today, we are going to resort right back to where we are right now. Does that make sense? The incentive element is built into this reflection of the future. That's what education is so critical in the future. Say, listen, this is the way our society used to work. This is the way we're operating now. And if you don't see these values and the sustainability and the importance of these values, then you're just going to start to perpetuate a regression back into a highly troublesome period in our history. So, I hope that helps.
Okay, folks, we've got to wrap it up there now. Time. Thank you all for coming. Yeah.
Very quick thing to mention, this Wednesday at the Elixir Bar in